Let's get going. Questions, comments? We're so glad Joe is here because Joe's always got a good question for us. Go ahead, Joe.
Maccabees. How come we don't have Maccabees? Does anybody, any other religion besides the Catholics have Maccabees?
No, not in the same level, on the same level. You will find the Old Testament Apocrypha. You will find that in Coptic Bibles. Some Eastern Orthodox, I'm not sure, I can't remember if it's Russian or Ukrainian or another one, Armenian, probably Armenian. Yeah, probably Armenian. The reason why we don't have Maccabees is really simple. When the Jews put together the what's called the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, and that was started on in the 200s BC, 200 years before Christ, wrapped up, finished, and reproduced about 150 or so. The Jews, did not include what is called the Old Testament Apocrypha. The Western Church, well, the Christian Church in general, the Apostolic Church, the Church of the Apostles, when the New Testament books were gathered, they would be gathered, when they were starting to put together, they'd be gathered, the three synoptic gospels together, and then finally the Gospel of John added. You understand that the Gospel of John is at least 30 years older in writing when it was written than the first three. Matthew, Mark, and Luke were completed most likely before the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. John was not completed until as late as 100 AD. So, again, 30 years difference between those. So it took, the first three traveled around, books traveled independently, of course, for the first 25, 30 years. But then they began to be bound together or scrolled together or put together in their in various places. The synoptics, what's called the synoptics, the first three, and then those. And then the New Testament, the epistles of Paul were gathered, put together. And then we call it the general epistles, or the epistles of Peter, James, book of Hebrews, and so on and so forth. Probably the book of Hebrews. The book of Hebrews and the book of Revelation, probably the last, most likely the last to enter into the New Testament. Anyway, when that process was being done, the Christian church simply accepted without question and without really a whole lot of debate, they simply accepted the books that the Jews had already codified. In other words, already at the time of the Babylonian captivity, or after the Babylonian captivity, the Old Testament, of course, was mostly completed. You still had Zechariah and Malachi to go in, along with Nehemiah. But within 100 years after the captivity, the Old Testament was finished. And the Jews immediately recognized those, what we call 39 books. They had fewer because they combined 1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd James, 1st, 2nd Chronicles. Okay. Anyway, those books were recognized by the Jews as canonical. The word canon means rule. Okay, so something that's canonical means it's according to the rule, according to the straight edge. That's what you go by. When you're drawing a line, you use a straight edge, you use a ruler. Well, that's the word they used. Okay, so these were considered to be inspired, inerrant, infallible. All right, so this was the Old Testament canon was closed at least 150, probably 200 years before Christ. So it's not the Christians' fault, it's not certainly not the Protestants' fault that those books of Apocrypha are not included in our Bibles. We didn't do it, okay? As a matter of fact, Luther, when he translated the Bible into German, included the Apocrypha because he felt that they were important historical documents. Okay? The Catholic Church, or the Roman Church, more accurately, Roman Church, the Roman Church, before the Reformation, did not count the Apocrypha as canonical. And you could say, frankly, you could say still don't. They are deutero, meaning second, like Deuteronomy. They are deuterocanonical in the Roman Church. If you look in the Roman Catechism, those books are listed as deuterocanonical. Okay? The only difference is deuterocanonical books in the Roman Church can be used to prove doctrine. They cannot be used for that in the Protestant Church, which includes, of course, Lutherans and all the Arminian and Calvinist churches and the Church of England, okay, the Anglican, or we would say in America, the Episcopal Church. Okay? You cannot use those for proving doctrine. You can use them for anything else. You can use them to comment on doctrine, to teach history, like the Maccabees, for example. Okay? You can use them for that. You just can't use them, especially as primary sources. They can't be the first verse or the primary verse that you use to prove doctrine. Even in the Roman Church, you can use them to prove doctrine, but that was only after the Council of Trent. Remember that the Council of Trent began 1545, 6 years, 1 year before Luther died, but didn't conclude until the 1570s. Council of Trent went on, off and on, for a long time. It's important to remember that the Romans did not use apocryphal books to prove doctrine before the Council of Trent, before 1545, that is, before the Reformation. So their use of the apocryphal to prove, let's say, prayers for the dead, purgatory, and other such things, that was not primary source. The primary source for those doctrines goes back to the Roman councils, the church councils, which, as Luther pointed out, contradict each other and are very often in error when compared to Scripture. The Romans meeting at Trent over those years decided that they needed to put the deuterocanonical books into the category of proving doctrine so that they could have Bible verses to back up purgatory and prayers for the dead. Without those books being used for that purpose, they have no scriptural support for those doctrines. So the second reason that they're not included in Protestant Bibles is because of that, because of the fact that those verses, of course, contradict very clear verses in the rest of Scripture. Okay. The third reason that we do not include them is because we do not know their authors. We can surmise in some cases, like, for example, the apocryphal book Bel and the Dragon. These are additional chapters to the book of Daniel. Perhaps they were written by Daniel, but the Jews never accepted that completely. It was a surmise, it was a guess, but it was never completely accepted. right? So the Song of the Three Children, same thing, never accepted. Maybe written by Daniel, maybe not, don't know. Second Maccabees, written by the same guy who wrote First Maccabees, probably not, but we don't know. There's only one book in the New Testament, canonical books, that is, the author is unknown, and that's only unknown, I guess, because we could say it's not 100% agreed upon. There's only one book, and that is the book of Hebrews. I believe, I'm convinced, doesn't take a whole lot to convince me, maybe, but I'm convinced that it was written by St. Paul. But he does not name himself as the author. The early church always grouped Hebrews along with the letters of Paul, always, and still do to this day. Look in any English Bible, or German Bible, or French Bible, or any other Bible, and you'll see Hebrews right after the last Pauline epistle, Philemon. Okay? And that is a gesture to saying, we think this was written by Paul. But we can't prove it, except for the grammar, the syntax, a lot of the vocabulary is much like Paul. But there are things that are not like Paul in Hebrews too. Was put together by Paul and maybe Aquila and Priscilla, or Paul and Timothy, or Paul and Titus. We don't know. Okay. So that's the reason why the Apocrypha is not in our Bibles. We could add it, of course, and it wouldn't be a bad thing. Like I say, Luther put it in there. Luther said it was good history for you to know. He didn't think that it was necessarily inaccurate as far as history is concerned. He only said it was inaccurate as far as some doctrinal teachings. So, anything else on that or something else? Yes, sir.
Also, in the United States, it became a functional thing. Publishers realized that they could make the same amount of money for a Bible by not including it.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. There has been some impetus in the past when new translations come out to include the Apocrypha in the back of the Bibles rather than in between the Testaments where the Romans have them. But as he points out, it's more expensive. And there's a certain threshold over which you really can't go when you're charging for Bibles. People don't mind paying for Bibles. They just don't want to pay a whole lot. Like these, for example, I buy these by the case. I get a case discount. I think they're $12 a piece.
Well, thanks. You charged me $40.
Shh, quiet. But, even like us, it's not really large print, but they call it large print. They call it giant print, which is not. But anyway, something like this, somebody would be willing, I think, to pay $10, $12, $15 for. But they're not willing to pay $20. And so you throw 12 apocryphal books on the back, make it an extra half inch, quarter inch maybe. It's not worth it. You can usually buy, I don't know if I still have one, I lent it out a long time ago and never got it back, but I used to have an apocryphal book, separate book. Nope, that's not it. Separate. You could buy those, used to be pretty easily in the old days. I don't know, I haven't seen them for sale anyplace, even in Christian bookstores for a long time. You almost have to buy a Catholic Bible to get those if you want to read them. Questions otherwise? I got a good question, and I thought I would print out the answer because this is something that probably may come up to your mind from time to time. And I thought it would be nice for you to have something that you could refer back to when such things came to your little gray cells. Questioning God. Right? or wrong? The question I got literally was, is it a sin to question God? And before I even start reading through this, the premise is that you know, or you think you know, what God is doing in your life or somebody else's life or in the world or whatever. That's the premise. Because otherwise, how are you questioning him? If you don't, in other words, you think God is allowing some evil or doing something that is unpleasant or bad to you or somebody else, and therefore and then you question, you say, well, why is that happening? Or how come he's doing it that way or whatever? So the premise that you even know what God is doing is shaky at best. We don't really know. We think we know, but we don't really know. So just keep that in mind as we're going through this. So what's the issue here? The real issue, as I say, is not whether we should question God, but how and for what reason. To question God is not in itself sinful. Very important. Note that first of all, right out the bat. Okay? So I guess we could end the entire discussion right there, but there's more to it than that. The prophet Habakkuk inquired of God concerning the timing and working of his plan for Israel. If you read the book of Habakkuk, or Habakkuk, as some people pronounce it, right away, Habakkuk is saying, why are you doing this, Lord? What's going on? How long are you going to make us suffer? Okay? He's really accusing God. I mean, Habakkuk is a book you want to read if you want to read somebody who's yelling at God. Okay? That's what Habakkuk basically does. God did not rebuke Habakkuk for his questions. Rather, he patiently answered him, and he, that is Habakkuk, ended his book with a song of praise to the Lord. In other words, God answered Habakkuk over a number of chapters, and at the end, Habakkuk really didn't know any more than he did to start with, but he thanked God for the answer anyway. Also, we note that many questions are asked of God throughout the Psalms. I mean, all through the Psalms. You know, and the book of Job, too, you could throw that in there. Okay? And the book of Proverbs, Song of Solomon, Ecclesiastes. There's a lot of questions in those books. These are the cries of persecuted believers desperately seeking God's intervention and salvation. Through the prophet Jeremiah, God says, ask me and I will tell you remarkable secrets you do not know about things to come. How could it be wrong to question God when Jesus himself encouraged, keep asking and it will be given to you, keep searching and you will find, keep knocking and the door will be opened to you, for everyone who asks receives, and the one who searches finds, and the one who knocks the door will be open. So Jesus himself is saying, that's okay. Keep inquiring. It's all right. It's not a problem. That itself is not the issue again. In addition, believers in the Bible express grave doubts to God about their ability to serve him. Moses implored, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Gideon, Elijah, Jeremiah were all filled with questioning and uncertainty about their places in God's plan. Even Abraham doubted God's promises. Remember what Abraham said? He said, I'm going to die without a child, and a servant in my house, Eliezer, is going to inherit everything. He's complaining to God. He's basically telling God that God's promise to him to have a child, that's not going to happen. So he's very seriously questioning God. The ever-faithful Joshua also questions God's actions in Joshua chapter 7. And of course, Christ's apostles often voiced their reservations. This will never happen to you, Jesus. Oh, are you kidding me? No, why would that happen? Why, what's going on? You know? Or Jesus, don't you care? We're going to drown here. Why aren't you doing something? Okay? So there's questioning from them, and they're believers. Okay? However, God does not always answer our questions the way we want or expect. Still, we can conclude from these passages that God welcomes any sincere question from an earnest heart. At the same time, insincere questions or questions with a hypocritical or deceitful intent are a different matter. The Pharisees and Jewish leaders often presented their questions to trick or trap Jesus, but he refused to answer them or gave them a perplexing question himself. The Bible says, without faith it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and he rewards those who earnestly seek him. Unbelief is a failure to trust the Lord and a sign of rebellion and disobedience against God. We note that after King Saul disobeyed God and lost his faith, his questions went unanswered. So again, it's not wrong to question God or question God's methods or question God's ways, right, if it's done sincerely. Right? But you can't always expect a particular answer or expect an answer in a particular period of time. Believers often wonder why God allowed a particular event to happen, but this is entirely different from directly questioning God's goodness or truthfulness. Having doubts is not the same as questioning God's wisdom and power or attacking his holy character. It's one thing to say, I don't understand this, I don't get it, explain it to me, make it clear to me, God. And it's another thing to say, God, you're mean, you're cruel, you're cold, you don't care, etc. Those are two completely different questions, if you will. One comes from faith, the other comes from unbelief. People who are not believers do not belong to God and so question his working in the world. We should not expect atheists and agnostics or unbelievers, people belonging to cults and false religions, we should not expect them to question God in a good way or a kind way or believing way. We should expect them to question God in a very accusatory way. And that's what they do. So then, an honest question is not wrong or sinful, but cross-examining God from a bitter, untrusting, or rebellious heart is the fruit of unbelief. So, bitter, angry, accusatory, that is wrong. God is not intimidated, shocked, or displeased by our heartfelt questions. He understands our weakness and fear and invites us to seek full understanding and fellowship with him. When we question God, our attitude should reflect a humble spirit, trusting heart, and open mind. We can question the Lord, but we should not expect to always receive an answer when, where, and how we want. Answer or not, we must continue to believe in him and accept his loving and eternal perspective. God knows our hearts and whether or not we genuinely desire him to enlighten us. Thus, it is our inner intentions that determine whether it is right or wrong to question God. So when those doubts and questions come to mind and you're wondering if you can do so correctly or rightfully, you can refer back to this paper. Comments, questions? All right, let us get back to Exodus. We are in chapter 23 still. 126 in the large Bibles. And we want to pick it up at verse 20. We'll read through the first few verses of that section and then go back to the notes. Verse 20 and following, behold, I am going to send an angel before you, this is God talking again, to guard you along the way and to bring you into the place which I have prepared. Be on your guard before him and obey his voice. Do not be rebellious toward him, for he will not pardon your transgression, since my name is in him. But if you truly obey his voice and do all that I say, then I will be an enemy to your enemies and an adversary to your adversaries. For my angel will go before you and bring you into the land of the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Canaanites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, and I will completely destroy you. Let's stop there for now. there is some contradiction or consternation, if you will, or conflagration, I suppose, in describing or identifying this angel. If you want to say that this angel is the pre-incarnate Christ, the angel of the Lord, I wouldn't call you a heretic. If you don't want to say that this angel is the angel of the Lord, the pre-incarnate Christ, I wouldn't call you a heretic either. It is, to our minds, unclear whether or not this is one of the cases where it is the second member of the Trinity who's doing this. He certainly can, and at the same time, be anywhere and everywhere with God. He can be leading the Israelites in the wilderness and still be doing whatever else the triune God is doing. That's not a problem. It may be for our minds and our logic, but it's not a problem biblically or scripturally. Okay? Let's look at the notes. In verses 20 and 23, God tells Moses they would be guided by an angel on their way to the Lord. My personal opinion is this is none other than the angel of the Lord, the second person of the Trinity, God's Son, the Lord Jesus Christ, in his pre-incarnate state. I am convinced of that. I'm not going to insist that, I'm not going to say anybody who denies that is a heretic, but I don't see that there's a problem with that. I really don't. I studied it for a long time, and that's the conclusion I've come to. It may seem strange to us that God says these things to Moses here, since most certainly the presence of the Lord had already been with him all the time in the form of the cloud and the column of fire. God is simply repeating the fact here for the comfort of Moses and the people. These words put the journey through the desert in a historic perspective. It shows that God does lead many to glory through the guidance of Jesus Christ, as listed in Hebrews 2, and that Israel's journey through the wilderness is a picture of the pilgrimage of the believer through this world on his way to heaven. I think it fits very, very nicely with the New Testament. And the idea of the New Testament presents very often as we are pilgrims in this world going through the wilderness of this world. And we are being led by Jesus Christ. Okay? I think that fits beautifully. Right? For whatever reason, there are others who have a problem with this being the pre-incarnate Christ. I don't think those objections really are all that great or all that convincing, frankly. In order to understand God's animosity toward the inhabitants of Canaan, we have to remember that the conquest was not a matter of tribal warfare. This is the way it's presented by most liberal Christians. This is the way it's presented in most churches. This is the way it's taught in most so-called Christian colleges and seminaries. That this was tribal warfare and that it happened hundreds of years after indeed it did. But that is typical. The Bible gives only sparse information about the spiritual condition of the people that inhabited Canaan. It is easy to underestimate the horror of their sinful practices. Their idolatry was no innocent practice of primitive religion. It was the kind of inhuman, demon-inspired behavior that was the reason for the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. You remember that as Joshua came into the promised land, he was ordered by God to eliminate the Canaanites. Men, women, children, animals. Everything was to be killed, dead. Infants, pregnant women, the whole 9 yards. Okay? Much like what you see today in Gaza. Perpetrated on the Israelites by Hamas, and now perpetrated by Israel on Hamas. This is a kind of warfare that God commanded on his people to do to the Canaanites. And you remember what God said at that time. He said that their iniquity, their sins, okay, the time of their sins has been fulfilled. In other words, it's basically God's way of saying, I have had it up to here with you, and I ain't going to take no more. And of course, God could have simply sent a plague or a famine or an earthquake or a whatever and just wiped them out himself. or just kill them where they stood. All right? He didn't do that. He didn't treat them like he treated Sodom and Gomorrah. That was a direct intervention from God. He could have done that to the entire nation of Canaanites. Okay? He didn't do that. Instead, he used his own people. And, you can kind of understand that. He's telling us this is for your good. This was a test. Let's not make mince words here. This was a test. I'm going to give you a command. I'm going to give you an order. And it's a very unpleasant order. It's a very difficult order. I'm going to see if you're going to obey it. And of course they did not. They left many pockets of Canaanites spread throughout Israel. And those pockets of Canaanites expanded and influenced the Jews and brought them nothing but pain and sorrow their entire history until they were taken off to Babylon. So you can definitely see God's purpose in saying, kill them all. Don't leave a single one of them alive. Kill them all. Every single one of them. Even their animals. Kill their animals. Kill them all. Don't leave nothing standing. Annihilation. You want to use a good word for it that we people would understand in modern society? Genocide. That's what God commanded. Genocide. Terrible, spooky, boogeyman word today. But that's exactly what God commanded. When people criticize the Bible and criticize Christianity, or Judaism for that matter, and they say God commanded genocide, don't argue with them. Because that's the fact.
Pastor,
Yes?
what was the reason for killing the animals? Anybody know?
I think the same thing as go back to Abraham and the king of Sodom. King of Sodom. Or Salem. I think it was Salem. Maybe it was Sodom. I don't know. No, Sodom. Go back to that. What did Abraham say? I'm not going to take that gift from you because I don't want you to be able to say that you profited or that I profited from you, that I became great from you. In other words, God is saying, you guys got to start from scratch and trust in me. Don't start off ahead of the game by taking their flocks and their herds. You take their flocks and their herds, what do you might think? You might think, oh, look how great we are, right? Look how great we are when, frankly, we're really making bank off of the leftovers of pagans. So God does not want that. That's the one I can think of. Otherwise, I don't know. But you're right. I mean, they have no guilt as far as that goes. But God simply does not want them to have that available to them. He wants them to trust in Him for their existence. The Bible, you think about it. If what we know of the religion of Canaan and the peoples of Canaan, what we know, we don't know a lot, but we do know some. And it's horrible. Their idol worship practices were horrible. I think you've probably heard in other Bible classes or read in other books about the sacrifice of children. This was a huge deal with them. The god's name was Moloch, and he was a secondary god under Baal or Baal. And Moloch was the fire god and also fertility god. And the children would be, infants very often, would be sacrificed to this god by burning them alive. Usually the idol Moloch was a hollowed out statue with his arms outstretched, and the build a fire in his belly, and the heat would go through the hollow arms and the rest of it, and then they would lay a child across the arms like this, and it would basically fry. That's the kind of people we're talking about here. That's the kind of people where God says, I've had it up to here with you, and I'm not going to take it anymore. Now, these are the kind of people also that were left alive, and this kind of sacrifice was done all through the history of the Jews up until Babylon. The Jews worshipped the gods of the Philistines. The Jews worshipped the gods of the Phoenicians. They worshipped the gods of the Canaanites, Amorites, all the otherites, constantly. Much more than they ever did the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And that, folks, is a fact. There can be no dispute about that. I've told you before, I'll keep saying it. They did not practice the Sabbath. They did not keep these festivals that we're talking about here. They did not keep the Passover. They did not keep tabernacles. They did not keep Yom Kippur. They did not keep Rosh Hashanah. They did not keep them. None of them. Ever. For more than just tiny periods of time throughout their history. But boy, did they ever worship the pagan gods. Big time. Yes, sir.
Hope you don't mind if I
No.
propose something.
Yeah.
When you look at the parallels between the different cities that God destroys,
Uh-huh.
Sodom and Gomorrah,
Right.
all animals were also killed.
Right.
There's in that action a totality of destruction.
Annihilation, yeah.
Communicates their entire way of life.
Yes.
Is evil.
Right.
There's
Yes.
nothing redeemable.
Right. Nothing redeemable. Yes. That's a good point. And there was nothing redeemable in Canaanite culture. Canaanite culture was so shot through with sin and so shot through with immorality that it was not redeemable. Now, you can compare that to how God treated other empires and other cultures. There's a lot left over of ancient Indian culture. And I'm talking about the subcontinent, Hindu culture, if you will. There's a lot left over from that is permeated into modern society. There's a lot left over from Greek culture. And Greek culture was pretty idolatrous, wasn't it? Roman culture was pretty idolatrous, wasn't it? And yet there are a lot of things left over from those cultures. They were not annihilated completely. Even Egyptian culture was not annihilated completely. There's a lot of things, mathematics for one, and other things, a lot of science and astronomy, not astrology, but astronomy, things like that came over from the Egyptians. Even Muslim culture has contributed a great deal to our society, and God has allowed that. So when you look at the cultures that were completely wiped out and buried so that they didn't even know they existed until somebody ran across a potsherd in a field someplace. Assyrians is a good example. Did you know that in the 1700s, 1800s, early 1800s, that it was believed by most historians and scholars that there was no such thing as the Assyrians and that there was no such place as Nineveh? That's how wiped out that culture was. The culture of Nineveh was so wiped out that most historians did not believe, they just thought it was a myth until they finally found remnants of Nineveh digging around the northern part of what is today Iraq. Same thing with the Canaanites. Well, same thing with Sodom and Gomorrah. A lot of historians believe that Sodom and Gomorrah was a myth and a legend until they started finding things at the base of the bottom of the Dead Sea. Not bottom as below the water, but bottom as the southern portion. Okay? Yes, sir.
That's akin to some of the things that the Aztec Indians.
Sure. Yeah. Good analogy.
Part of the world.
Good analogy there too. What did the Aztecs? the Toltecs, Incas, Mayans, all right, didn't provide a lot to our culture, even Mexican culture, even South American culture, until just recently. Again, the tales, if you want to call them that, from the conquistadors of the marvels that they found in Central and South America were thought by a lot of historians to be, 7 cities of gold kind of nonsense. They didn't believe it until they stumbled across things, down in the peninsula of Mexico and places like that. And then they stumbled upon these huge pyramids and things like that. So again, these were wiped out. They were annihilated almost to complete extinction, to the point where people thought they never existed at all, period. Okay? You can say the same thing for people like the Druids. A lot of people felt that the Druids were just made up by people. That they were talking, they figured the Druids were no different than leprechauns, okay? Or elves and fairies. Until they finally started digging up pieces and little pieces here and there of the truth, all right? You could say that of a lot of cultures down through time where God has just annihilated them. It's just, so they cease to exist until somebody digs in the ground and finds some evidence. And then they're amazed. Wow, these people really did exist. I mean, the list of those nations and cultures is pretty long, frankly. Okay, moving on.
Were they considered believers and also...
Who was?
The people that got eliminated?
No, of course not. No.
Okay.
They were not a believer, no.
So
They were idol worshipers.
okay.
Yeah.
And is that considered to be the why he had this done?
No. I mean, think about it. The Chinese were certainly unbelievers. They weren't wiped out. Japanese were unbelievers. They weren't wiped out. Native Americans, unbelievers. They weren't wiped out. Some of them were eventually, but that was another story. The Celts were unbelievers at that time. Again, Romans, Greeks, they were unbelievers at that time. They weren't wiped out. So there is a point. Yes, God has the right, of course, to wipe out everybody, including believers, frankly. So you could say, well, is that the reason that God wipes them out? It's because they're unbelievers. Not really. To tick God off to the extent where He annihilates you, you have to kind of go, over the line. you have to kind of be really obnoxious. You can't just be sort of obnoxious. You got to be really obnoxious. All right? Which is, I think, where our society is at right now. I think right now we're on kind of a borderline right now as a society. We're pretty obnoxious, but I don't know that we're really across the line obnoxious. When you start legalizing pedophilia, yeah. When people are starting marrying their pet goats, yeah. Okay? We've already got infanticide in abortion. We've already got that. Okay? We're sacrificing unborn and almost born to convenience. That's the God, of course. God is convenience. And so we're already doing that, right? And we're already saying there are, 26 genders or whatever. So we're already doing that. We already have gods of greed and pornography and whatever. We already have that. All right? So, we've crossed a lot of lines already. What's the line that we're going to cross where God finally treats us like He did the Canaanites or Sodom and Gomorrah? I don't know. I think legalizing polygamy will probably be another step. That's got to come. Just like legalizing same-sex marriage has happened. I think legalizing polygamy that's the next shoe to drop, I'm sure.
Why would that be against God when the Old Testament, a lot of them had many wives?
Right. Well, that's going to be one of the arguments.
Right. So I don't think God really frowns on that because it was...
I think God will frown on it from the standpoint that
of why
Yes, it's another step in the direction against his original plan, which was one woman, one man for life. Okay, that's obviously the pattern of Adam and Eve, and thus should be the pattern of the fact that Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, David, whatever, Solomon especially, didn't follow that plan. That's beside the point. That's not the issue.
And then they're gonna use that as the old Bible.
Yes.
As to why it's okay.
Sure. Well, the Mormons already do. Yeah.
But when the Bible says homosexuality is a sin,
No, that's different.
well, we can't use that.
We can't use that passage. We can use this one over here, but we can't use that one over there. Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah. But so I mean, where are we going? And I think again, pedophilia, approving that, making that not a crime anymore, that kind of thing. That will be a line that I think when we cross that line finally at some point in the next 10, 20, 30 years or less, I think we can start watching our six, and figuring the Lord is right on our tails here and about ready to annihilate our society. Whether that's last day annihilation or just in between, I can't say, of course. D. Centuries before Israel entered the land, God told Abraham, in the fourth generation, your descendants will come back here, Canaan, for the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. And sometimes the Bible uses, or God uses, Amorites to cover all of the Canaanites. Just as sometimes God uses the word Ephraim to cover all of the northern tribes. Or Ephraim and Manasseh to cover all the northern tribes. Judah to cover both Judah and Benjamin. Okay? God does that a lot, and He's allowed to do that. Okay? He's allowed to use shorthand. In the Old Testament, Moloch, Chemosh, and Ashtoreth were called detestable. There were even male shrine prostitutes in the land. The people engaged in all the detestable practices of the nations the Lord had driven out before the Israelites. Now, notice this. Just point this out. You might want to add this in your margin someplace. It says, the people, that's the Israelites. That's the Jews. The Jews engaged in all the detestable practices of the nations, that is the Gentiles, the Goyim, that the Lord had driven out before the Israelites. Now, the Israelites did not drive them all out. God would have if they would have kept fighting. They got tired. They got bored. They got lazy. And they stopped before the job was done. The perfect example of that was Jerusalem. They left Jerusalem as a citadel of Canaanites right smack in the middle of the land. And okay, time here, think time. Moses gets out of Egypt 1500 BC. Joshua crosses into the promised land 40 years later, 1450. It is not until the time of David, 1000 BC, 450 years later. In other words, the Israelites allow the Canaanite inhabitants of Jerusalem to remain in Jerusalem for 450 years. And that's true of many of other cities, too, that they did not take. I think that sometimes that needs to be remembered. We're not talking about leaving them alone for 10 years, or 20 years, or 30 years. We're talking about leaving them alone, not bothering them for centuries, and therefore allowing their influence to percolate into the Israelite culture over centuries. Yeah. And you can see why God was a little put out with the Israelites. Okay? Next point, the example of the practices of the Canaanite religion is found in 2 Kings, where we're told, Ahaz was 23 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 16 years. Unlike David, his father, he did not do what was right in the eyes of the Lord. He walked in the ways of the kings of Israel, and even, listen to this, sacrificed his son in the fire. It's just what I was talking about. So here's a king of Israel, literally king of the Jews, who sacrifices his son and heir, because usually this is the firstborn male, his son and heir into the arms of Moloch and burns him alive. This is a king of the Jews, folks. This is not some Canaanite ruler. This is a Jewish ruler. This is the ruler of Israel in Jerusalem, in the southern kingdom. We're not talking about northern kingdom here that all was hauled away in captivity and never heard from again. This is the southern kingdom. This is the line of the Messiah. This is the line of David, the royal line of David. And he's sacrificing his firstborn son in the arms of Moloch to burn alive.
Why?
For fertility, to make the fields produce and their animals be fertile.
Stupid.
Well, yeah, stupid. You think? Yeah. But, I mean, it's no different today. What's the most popular religion today?
Catholicism,
No. What's the most popular religion today?
Muslim.
No. What's the most popular religion today? No. What's the most popular religion today? Come on, people.
Money.
Oh, close. Okay.
Secularism.
Secularism. I would say entertainment.
Say again?
Entertainment, recreation. That's the most popular. What are people doing today, right now, in Sierra Vista and around here? At 10 o'clock in the morning, what are most people doing? They're either shopping, participating in sports, or some other form of entertainment.
Camping, eating breakfast.
Okay? That's the most popular religion in America today, which you can even narrow it down more than that. What is all that? All that does what? It satisfies what? What is it? What is that a sacrifice to, if you want? What is that worshiping? Self, exactly. Okay? So the most popular religion in America today is self. The most popular religion in America today feeds the self. Feeds the ego, feeds pleasure, feeds self-satisfaction, feeds desire for entertainment and recreation, feeds, whatever. That's the number one religion in America today. And has been for decades already. Okay?
Feeding themselves.
And yeah, feeding themselves. That's idol worship, isn't it? It's idol worship. The problem with America is not that we don't have the right church or that the right church is not here or there or whatever. The problem in America is that we have a lot of idols. The problem in America is that we have 200 million of them. That's the problem. It's not that we have one or two idols. It's not to just have idol of NFL football or the idol of baseball or the idol of in NASCAR or whatever. That's not the problem. The problem is we have 200 million people who don't go to church on Sunday. They have another God, which is themselves. That's the problem. And so we should not be surprised. We should not be surprised that the church is dying. And we should not be surprised that just today in the paper, you may have read the article in the paper about the oldest Methodist church in Arizona, Central Methodist Church in Phoenix, closing after 170 years, something like that. Started back in the 1840s, 1850s, down to a congregation of 20. In the 50s, used to be 300, 400 people going to that church every Sunday. My aunt and uncle used to go to that church once in a while. Beautiful church, big old mission-style church, right on Central Avenue in Phoenix. If you know anything about Phoenix, right on Central Avenue, big old thing. All right. I had a visitor stop by here to look at our church a few weeks ago. He was from our church in downtown Phoenix on 7th Avenue, Good Shepherd. And again, I can remember as a kid going to Good Shepherd when we went to Phoenix to shop. I can remember going to Good Shepherd and it was setting up folding chairs in the 60s. And you could easily put 300 people in that place. And for all intents and purposes, it's closed. Has to share a pastor with another church. So, but the problem is not enough religion. We have plenty of religion. The problem is too many idols. And everybody's their own idol.
Look how we worship the football players.
Oh yeah, no kidding.
Oh my God.
The Canaanites murdered their own infants in cold blood and burned them on the altar of their gods or buried them alive in the foundations of their building. That was another little trick they used to do. Gross sexual immorality was also part of religious practices. Religious prostitution and excessive orgies went hand in hand with their idolatry. And again, as I have pointed out numerous times, this all had to do with fertility. They were convinced by the surrounding idol worshippers, they were convinced that this was the best way to make sure that your fields and animals were fertile. It's like you had to give the gods a show to show them what you wanted. Okay? That's the idea. You acted it out. And so that's why you had temple prostitutes. And that's why you had these big orgies, big swinging parties, you would call them. Okay? That's why you had these things, because you were basically showing your gods what it is you wanted them to do. You wanted them to make you, your animals, and your fields fertile. And so you participated in gross sexual immorality in order to show your gods. Your gods are so stupid, they don't know what you're asking for when you ask for fertility, and so you have to show them. Talk about ridiculous gods, right? They're so stupid they don't know what you're talking about. But again, folks, you've got two religions here, side by side. You've got the religion of Yahweh, which we would have to admit at this point in the history is got a lot of rules, right? It's got a lot of regulations. Don't eat this, don't eat that, don't wear this, don't wear that, yada, yada, yada. You got to practice this, you got to worship this way. You know, if you don't do that, I'm going to smack you down, you know, whatever. And then, on the other hand, you've got this religion of party, right? Let's all get together on top of a hill. Let's get ourselves blind, stinking, staggering drunk and have as much sex as we want. Now, you put those two religions next to each other. Which is going to be more popular? Which is going to attract more people? Is the religion over here that you can't have a ham sandwich and you got to worship a certain way? Is that going to attract people? Or is there religion over here where it's drunkenness and orgies? Is that going to attract more people? Oh, come on, you know the answer. Well, yeah, you know the answer, of course. The party-hardy religion is going to be, and is it any different today? No, it's no different today, even within Christianity. Okay? The mega church, Joel Osteen type, okay? 300,000 people crowded in an auditorium. Okay? Liturgical churches, for the most part, throw a hand grenade in there, probably not going to kill too many people. Right? Calvary Chapel, overflowing. Okay? Contemporary worship, big time, everybody happy. Historic worship, liturgical worship, a lot of empty chairs, a lot of empty pews. Okay? So it's no different today than then. Letter E, Israel's conquest of Canaan was just as much an act of God as the flood that cleansed the ancient world. God wanted his people to cut out the cancerous growth in his world. But, unfortunately, they were half-hearted surgeons who, like all too soon, caught the disease themselves. When God gives you a command, folks, it's best not to do it halfway. God gives you a command, it's best to go all the way or don't bother. Because he wouldn't give you the command if he didn't want you to go all the way. This is also part of a problem in Christianity in the United States, is that we want our cake and eat it too. We want to be Christians, we want to follow God, but at the same time, we also want to have all the goodies and all of the comforts and all of the fun and all of the excitement and all of the accoutrement of our society. And we don't want anybody to be mad at us. We don't want anybody to be upset with us. And so when we have people over, we stock our bar or whatever with Bud Light, so that everybody can know that we're not bigoted. Okay? That's the vast majority of us. Even, I would say, us. Right? Even us. Even the Orthodox, conservative, confessional, Lutheran Christians. Right? We still want to be seen as, we don't want to be seen as too rigid. We don't want to be seen as too doctrinaire. Okay? We don't want to be seen as too hyper. Okay? We don't want to be seen as prejudiced and bigoted and narrow-minded and, we don't want that. Okay? We don't want that. It doesn't work. Just look at Israel. It doesn't work. It doesn't work to go into Canaan, kill 60% of them, but leave 40% of them alive. 60-40 does not work. 70-30 does not work. 75-25 does not work. 80-20 does not work. Doesn't. 95-5, maybe. All right. In verse 23, the Lord promises Israel the victory. As a matter of fact, he says, I will wipe them out. Notice that. He doesn't say you will wipe them out. He says, I will wipe them out. A literal translation would be, I will cut them off. The Hebrew word used here means to separate from life by act or word, hence to destroy. When you read in the Bible, God says, cut them off from their people. He's not talking about send them out away from the camp only. That often is included. But sometimes it means kill them. When they disobey the Sabbath, for example, kill them. Cut them off from the people. There means stone them to death. I mean, this is just God's way of saying, hey, take this stuff seriously.
It's no different than the guard.
Right. The angel with the flaming sword. Yeah.
You're cutting them off from
Yep.
the tree of life,
Exactly.
the community of life.
Exactly. You're basically saying, okay, you're done. You're through. Other meanings include to hide or conceal from existence, to cut down, to make desolate, to completely efface, to annihilate. The battle is the Lord's. This is what God's desire is. God's desire was, in the case of the Canaanites, to annihilate them, to cut them off from the land of the living, entirely, completely, 100%. And again, that's not what the Jews did. The spiritual implications of this Old Testament truth for our life and time are abundantly clear. In our struggle against evil, the battle belongs to God and not to us. He is the one who overcomes the world, and we need never doubt our final and complete victory in the end. This should be our impetus. This should be our motivation, knowing that God's is the victory. We should not be bashful about standing out. We should not be bashful or ashamed or afraid of being noticed as being different. We should not worry whether or not somebody thinks we are bigoted or prejudiced or narrow-minded or whatever. So what? Big deal. My children think that of me. And I'm not changing for them. I don't care what they think. It hurts, yes. They were raised different and they were raised better, but they are a product of their surroundings. They are a product of their society. Once they left my house and went out into the world, now they've been out into the world longer than they were in my house. when they left at 18. Now they're double that in most cases. And it's like living among the Canaanites. That's exactly what it is. And therefore, I'm not surprised. I'm not shocked, but I'm certainly not going to change. You know, they can dislike that all they want, and they can cut me off from the Facebook account, and they can disown me from Instagram, and whatever, and not answer my emails. All they want. And it's not going to make me preach different, or act different, or teach different. That's life, bud. You pays your money and you takes your chances. You roll the wheel and see where it lands. That's the way it goes. But not no skin off my nose. When each of them were confirmed, I told them the same thing. Your soul is your business now. I'm not going to worry about it no more. I pray about it, but I ain't going to worry about it. It's no longer my responsibility. It's your responsibility. And that's the way we should be with our friends and neighbors and coworkers and everybody else. We shouldn't, you know, if they want to think we're bigoted and misogynistic because we believe in pro-life, too bad. If they want to think that we're prejudiced and horrible because we believe in only two genders, so too bad. Tough rocks. They're going to call HR on us? Let them. I think we ought to stand up when we get called by HR. I think we ought to stand up and say, excuse me, what about my rights? So-and-so, my secretary or my cube mate doesn't like to hear my anti-homosexual views. Well, you know what? I don't like to hear his pro-homosexual views. Why does he get to complain about me, but I don't get to complain about him? What the heck is with all garbage? It's like in the military, all right? Muslims have their own chaplains. And they have their own places to worship. And they get time off on Fridays. And they get all that stuff. Okay? But me, I go to the post and I ask for one room to have a Bible class for the soldiers that are in the intelligence thing that can't get off post. Okay? And I'm told no. Because I don't believe in women pastors. What the heck? You think the Muslims believe in women mullahs? No, they don't. But they get their little prayer room. I don't get my prayer room. How come? How come they get their prayer room and I don't get my prayer room? And I believe, not the same, but similar to they do. What's going on here? Well, it's because their imams and their mullahs and whatever have gone to the Pentagon and complained. My leaders have not. And I've told them to. I told them to 20 years ago. And they refuse. Well, we don't want to make waves. We don't want to cause problems. Well, why don't you just stand up? Why don't you get a spine for once in your life and stand up? And I told the head chaplain 20 years ago that I thought it was disgusting that they got a prayer room and I didn't. He basically told me I was not welcome on post anymore, so I don't go on post anymore. I don't bother. So I've been told off. Not just by the head chaplain, but by numerous first sergeants and captains and majors and others who have basically said to me, your prejudiced, bigoted, narrow-minded, super conservative, ultra whatever view is not welcome on this post. We are an inclusive army. Okay? We are inclusive. And so, you know, anybody else's view is not welcome. Well, whatever happened to free speech? Whatever happened to liberty and freedom? Where'd that go? That's ridiculous. Okay? But that's the way it is. But I think if more of us stood up and made a noise, all right, I think it would help a lot. All right.
Sir, you know, Carolyn gave me that American flag pin with the praying hands.
Uh-huh.
I was told at work that I can't wear that. I can only wear pins that are given out by Olive Garden.
Oh, okay.
Now people are wearing the gay pride flag on their lapels and
Of course.
blue hair, pink hair. That's okay.
Big surprise. We'll pick it up at verse 24. I was hoping to get done with this, but that's okay. We'll get it done next time. And letter H. Let's close. May the grace of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, the love of God the Father, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be and abide with us all. Amen. Thank you. Thank you.